Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian. And today's conversation, no guest today, just Shawn and I talking about some of the most powerful people in our lives, those that have influence. They're outside of our parents and our family, probably the most influential, the most advisory, and the most underappreciated group of folks. Those teachers, the teachers in our lives. Cannot wait to have this conversation today and talk about this very important group of folks, especially for those in our special needs community. So stay tuned for another episode of Just Two Dads. Hey, everybody. I'm Brian Altunian along with Shawn Francis in another episode of Just Two Dads. We started this almost 4 years ago. And every time it flies by, doesn't it? We're going to break our episodes down into seasons. We have so many episodes. We're closing in on number 200, which is very exciting for us because it's been a conversations that started as just two dads of kids dealing with special needs issues, and it's turned into a community that we're so proud to be a part of and supportive of. And today's conversation is no exception. So before we jump into it really quickly, I want to say if you're catching us on our Facebook page, please feel free to comment and post questions or subject matters you'd like us to discuss. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel, please feel free to subscribe, hit the button there. Also, if you can reach out to us on our on our new website at justtodadspodcast.com. Shawn just put that up on the screen. If you're catching us on all of our podcast outlets, whether it's iHeartRadio, Google, Apple, thank you for making us part of our listening day, and to our family down in the U.S. Virgin Islands on WSTX AM radio. Thank you again for making us part of your listening day. Appreciate all of you. I want to thank Sean Hall out in Hawaii, who keeps us on track, manages all of our technical and social media outreach and design and everything. So thank you, Sean Hall, for all the work that you do. And Billy Footwear, always a friend and sponsor of the program. If you go to Billy Footwear, the story on Billy Price, the founder, is fascinating. And click on the link come to our page and click on the link, and you'll get an additional 10% off everything else. By the way, I think site-wide, they're at 25% off. Use our link, and you'll get an additional 10% off on top of that. So thanks to Billy Footwear for all your support. And without further ado, we're going to get into this conversation today about teachers. And I know, Shawn, you've posted something recently and got a lot of response. And the state of affairs of the teachers in our country. It's really it's bad and getting worse in a time when there's more money available, and it's frankly, it's a travesty. But so we want to get into that conversation. Just want to ask you, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Getting ready to the end of the school year. A lot of transitions we talked about last week. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Not health-wise, feeling kind of off today. I'm not sure. Got a little bit of a headache and that kind of thing, but I'm sure that's going to dissipate as we begin talking here, because my focus is going to be more there than anywhere else. And there's so much going on, and generally in this month anyway for us, as a family in May, we have Elijah's birthday, we got my mom's birthday, we've got Mother's Day, we've got the oldest of the boys, Joey, his birthday. And then my mom had a milestone birthday this year. And then we also had a milestone birthday for Elijah. And then, right after we did our show last week, he graduated high school. And that was something else. And we talked about it, last week when we were talking about transitions, and we're talking about completing the conservatorship with him, which we just did as well this month. And you're so busy doing what you do, and you're the one that said to me, well, you're really stopped to think that's a really big transition and a really big deal. Yeah. And I don't know that I appreciated teachers. So where today's subject comes from, I don't know how much I really appreciated teachers growing up. I think the first teacher that I really connected with, I've never had a bad teacher. I had a teacher that maybe seemed a little confrontational. I was a tough kid to quote unquote get, or a nut to crack, because as I said, conversation wise, you would have reason to believe that I carried some intelligence, but when you put me in front of anything that was academic, it would be like, why does he not get any grades? And I couldn't figure out, well, why I don't get the grades. I just figured out, I just knew I was bored. I didn't like it, which is so weird because now I'm, such a voracious reader and I love learning new things to the point of like really quirky and weird. It's like if I know something today that I didn't know yesterday, I think that's just such a great day. So in many ways, I'm now for those that remember the show Cheers, I'm kind of the Cliff Clavin of life, which is, did you know that such and such a thing? So these things are just, so that tells you later on in life, you realize that it's not like that you lack a desire to learn, but maybe the way you process things. And that's where we go back to me feeling like I've never been diagnosed with anything. And I think I have slipped through the cracks. I had one teacher, Mr. Wilson, in sixth grade in St. Thomas. And he wrote plays, he taught literature, and he just brought out the best in everybody. And he was hilarious. And so, but I didn't have him all throughout, high school. So in defense of most teachers, it was tough to figure out because quite frankly, my parents had me in all kind of tutoring and everything. And a lot of the teachers put in extra time with me. I didn't get to really appreciate what the profession of teaching is and what it brings until, when Laura and I met and she had her daughters from her previous marriage. They did fairly well in school. I didn't know their teachers as well as, as Laura might, but the relationship with them was still kind of cursory because they were neurotypical and they went to school and they did their thing. They didn't even need a lot of help with homework, so to speak. When Elijah's born, Laura's been through that before. I, as a first-time parent, if I say that we had separation anxiety, when I say we, I'm referring to Elijah and I. Because I would take him to, he had just been home with us. So you take him to school to drop him off. The school district was so accommodating that I'd be able to go to the classroom and work my way out of the room. In other words, the goodbyes would get further and further, closer and closer to the gate, where eventually I'd leave him at the gate. And I just had this, have these anxiety. I'd literally drop him off, and cry as I left just because he was crying as well. And I have to tell you, the first teacher that we had was great. Each year he went from middle school to, from kindergarten to middle school, we found ourselves going, oh my gosh, this teacher was so great. Are we going to get that lucky again with another teacher when it comes to the next school? So
all right. I want you to finish this, but this is we're going down. I wanted to talk just in general first.
Yeah.
You mentioned your teacher in sixth grade and the challenges that you faced as a student. What other teachers were influential in your life? Do you remember any of the other teachers that were influential in your life?
None to the extent of him, which is why I mentioned it, because when I think of everybody else, they were good people and they were kind. I didn't have any difficulty with anybody, but nobody got me the way he did. And then, as I said, I think I was kind of tough to get anyway when it comes to
I know, I get results. But what was it about him that that stood out for you?
I'm glad you're going down that road.
I have my own answers to my own stuff, but I want to ask you first.
I don't know why or I don't know that I can explain or articulate why or how, but I felt most myself in his classes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And nothing prior to that.
No, prior to that was actually some of the most difficult, from like kindergarten all the way through to sixth grade, because in Caribbean culture as well too, it's like you're going to school to get good grades is like your job as a child. Like, it's almost like a matter of national security. which is why so many people either, go on to at least get their 4-year degree and that kind of thing. So if you don't do that, something's wrong. I spent more time thinking something was wrong with me. I felt the least as though something was wrong with me in his class. My second year of high school, I attended a boarding school in North Carolina called Laurenburg Institute, and I did well there, but that wasn't tied to any one teacher. I think I was just at a different point there. It was a good fit academically. That was it. So
yeah. And I think you bring up a good point. I mean, I think one of the challenges that teachers have, I mean, I think that their goal is always to try to connect with their students to create an environment where they can, with the optimal learning opportunity. And I think that, when kids are at a different stage in their developmental issues, whether it's emotional, physical, psychic, wherever they are in their development stage, you have to try to connect. And I think that that's a challenge. I remember many of my teachers in my elementary school, but my 6th grade teacher also was the one who stood out for me, Mr. Jenkins. And I think maybe that was because partially for us, we remember our older teachers, older grades, 5th, 6th, going into primary, going into middle school, because our maturation level is at the point where we're kind of accepting. Mr. Jenkins, he was always, there was something about his class. He had a calm way of talking to us when it was, we had these old bungalows and, when it was hot, he would have the lights off. He would read. I'll never forget where the red fern grows, because Mr. Jenkins would read that to us on hot days. He'd have the lights off in the room and he would read that book to us. Yeah, you can say something.
I think you just triggered something where I was like, okay, why did I feel the most myself? The way you said the lights off, and it seemed like Mr. Jenkins stepped outside the box to accommodate.
Yeah.
And that was something Mr. Wilson did. What he did is he, it's funny because I'm telling you, he taught literature and stuff. He had us do these, anything that we had that was biodegradable, like orange peels or anything like that. He'd have you save it for mulch, right? And he started a garden, and the area where the garden was, it was like the classrooms were, the buildings almost set up like a house. It's very different at this school, Antilles School, St. Thomas Virgin Islands. And you come out of the classroom, kind of go down the hill, and this is where the garden was. He had us use what he would refer to as lap boards. They were like pieces of, I guess like plywood or something like that. And you would take that, go down to where the garden was, and he would conduct class outside. And that was his way of thinking in terms of the way he gave instruction and everything. And every year there was a play that was put on that he wrote as well. And he ended up writing a book also.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's the idea that you've got these rules and you're not necessarily going to step so far outside of them to upset administration. But why don't we just kind of just linger or loiter just outside of it just a little bit? If the payoff is that these kids are going to feel like they're seen, they're heard, they're got and understood, and just maybe it reflects on their grades, and maybe even more so reflects on the people that they become. And I think that might be the answer there.
Well, it's interesting because I remember a couple of things that in middle school, we used to call it junior high school, back in the day when it was grade 7 through 9. I was more interested in, well, first of all, I was interested in girls, but I was interested in the subject matter to some degree, but the teachers that stood out to me in middle school were the teachers that had certain kinds of mannerisms that I found interesting. And there are a bunch of us that would, we had Mr. Wisely, who was very gaunt, and he would stand there with his arms crossed and stick his finger. It looked like he was sticking his finger all the way up to almost touch his eyeball. It was the weirdest thing, as he would stand in the front of the room and talk to us. And that was for geometry. And so he taught a math class. There's that odd characteristics. In high school, one of my favorite teachers actually her name was Mrs. Spielberg. She was actually Steven Spielberg's aunt.
And okay, I don't know why I know that.
Yeah, she also taught math. We may have mentioned it once before. She also taught math, and I had her like towards the end of the day. And she, back in the day when it was before whiteboards, right? They all wrote with chalk on a chalkboard, And by the end of the day, she was always fixing her face and touching her hair. She had chalk all over her hands and face and clothing. And this is this crazy thing. But she was so sweet and so and stern, but sweet. And those are the kinds of things that I remember.
Stand out.
Yeah. And then, by the way, I could tell you, like, I don't remember many of my college professors, with the exception of those that were in my designated path
Study.
that really taught a class that was important, that was significant to me. And this was the last thing I was going to say, and I'll shut up here for a second. But here's what I learned when I was studying the manner and how we study and how we learn. The learning process is a give and take between teacher and student in a neurotypical situation. So in kindergarten, it's about 99% teacher and 1% student, right? So we're getting to learn their environment. And then in kindergarten, it's about 95-5. And in elementary school, it's about 80% teacher, the learning process, and 20% on the student. That's where you start to get some homework and start to learn on your own and read a little bit, 80-20. And then, in middle school, it's about 50-50, where you've got a lot more assignments to do and you've got homework and you've got projects and stuff. So it's 50% teacher, 50% student. And then the high school, it's about 80-20, but it's really kind of 20% on the teacher, about 80% on the student. So you really have to kind of do stuff to get to the next level. And for those kids that want to get best grades and get to college and go beyond, there's more on them. They're joining clubs and they're involved in campus things, and the learning process is more on. And then in college, it's 90% student, 10% teachers, and postgraduate, it's 99% student and 1%
student.
It transitioned significantly, right? And so our how we remember, how we learn from our teachers is what part of that process did we take on as students, that percent that was ours to take on, right? And so sometimes we'll remember the teachers who stand out, which the expectation is it's 50-50, but they do something like you just mentioned. They do something a little out of the ordinary, out of the norm, out of the box. They take the kids outside. They go do field trips. They do things that are memorable and make the content really stand out to the students.
Yeah.
That's
and for me, it's like, a lot of time it's like, this is a person that has to teach you, that's one of the biggest misnomers I think you have as a kid. Yeah, that person has a job. He's stuck with me for a certain portion of the day, and this is something he's supposed to do.
And some do that, just phone it in.
Yeah, exactly. And but with Elijah's graduation and leading up to it, I guess this applies anyway, but again, as a first-time parent, like I said, for me, the whole thing was, oh my gosh, he's got this great teacher at this level. What's going to happen at the next one? Each level that he was at, from kindergarten to middle school to high school, there have been nothing but great teachers along the way, and then great aides. And I have, we have great relationships with them. And know them to an extent and everything. But when, I think I mentioned that his teacher has an event that she hosts every year that consists of the children that have graduated, past graduates, and those that are graduating within that week. And getting to see firsthand the connection and the relationship that he has with those people was just, I didn't realize what we didn't know in terms of the way they care about him, the way he cares about them. And then I stop and think about it, just as a parent, when you, for whatever amount of hours it is per day, you leave your child in the hands of someone else. The education piece is one thing, but the manner in which they're cared for and believe in themselves and are supported, that alone is just so ridiculously immeasurable. Because that when he's at school, if there's anything that we worry about, it doesn't have anything to do with his safety, his interaction in a classroom or anything like that, and to have that is so incredibly immeasurable. And so to then know that people that choose this profession are underpaid, generally speaking, and then to find out that in special education, there's almost no gap in pay. That's astounding.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. The amount of support that our teachers get is, well, first of all, it's so small, and it's sad. And I was just going to say, the other thing is it's one of the few professions where the amount of stuff that they have to manage, they're caregivers and educators for our kids. They have to be responsive to some degree, or the other piece that they have is they have responsiveness to parents. They have to adhere to district standards. They have an administration, the principal and the administration, which are separate from teachers. They have to follow the teachers' union guidelines, right? I mean, there's so much stuff going on. There's so many, folks that they have to answer to and respond to. And then when it comes to, I want to be successful in teaching my kids and do something outside the box, oftentimes they have to pay for their own stuff that they want to bring into
supplies.
Yeah.
And I want to get into what prompted the story today, which is what made me tell you, you know what, here's what I think would make a great topic. So I don't know if it's the very most recent cover. I don't think so, because the post that I reshared on social was from one that somebody posted from May 7th, but it's a cover of Time magazine, and there's a teacher on it. Yeah. And it says, I have a master's degree, 16 years of experience, work 2 extra jobs, and donate blood plasma to pay the bills. I'm a teacher in America. And it just really hit me, because I was aware that teachers buy their own supplies, again, which is crazy. I've heard stories about professors at the university and at college level that live in vehicles and things like that. Because then the other thing that takes place is there's an imbalance between your responsibility and what you make, but then you've also got student loans and debt. And so one of the things that I started looking at is trying to figure out, why is it that teaching is so, why they're underpaid, and what's it like in various parts of the world. And so the one thing I did is, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it. I had it here. I ended up looking it up, trying to figure out, well, why is it that teachers are so greatly underpaid, despite the fact that they, do such valuable work. And I thought this is exceptionally interesting. I'm going to share it right here in a second here. And it goes back to the notion that that it is a feminine thing, believe it or not, which is just so weird to even think of, at least where it started. So according to througheducation.com, what they're saying, the historical context is as follows. The teacher pay gap.
Where did this come from? Yeah. Where did this come from, this document? Througheducation.com. THROUGH, education.com. Got it. Just if anybody's listening, you've got a thing up on the screen, right? So
yes, for those that are actually looking. And so the historical content, this goes back to a whole another subject, which is obviously related, but the preconceived notions that we have about each other or about people based on race and gender. So it says the teacher pay gap is not a new issue. It has roots in historical factors such as the feminization of the teaching profession, where teaching was seen as women's work and therefore undervalued and underpaid. And what's really messed up about that is that when you look at that being the source of the gap, it sadly makes sense. And it's probably very pervasive. Nobody's sitting up consciously going, well, you know what? That's a woman's job, so we're just not going to pay that much. I shouldn't say that. Maybe they did years ago, and then it's never really changed, because we're obviously past the point where people think gender specific when they think of teachers or professors. But if that was not the case at one time, that would be the seed for what we have today. And then I was surprised to find that I also got curious. Well, what is the difference between what the average special education teacher makes and those that teach gen ed? There's very little gap between the two, which is like, that's like, I couldn't believe that. So one other thing that I took a look at as I started to think, well, what does that mean when it comes to instances outside of our country then? You know, how does that compare? And so I took a look and I went to, why is this? I'm frozen here. Okay. Worldpopulationview.com. And if you take a look here, it gives the average salary of teachers by country, and where a teacher on average makes the most with a minimum of $71,812 annually is in Luxembourg. And then you look at Germany, Switzerland, South Africa. The US is, what number is that? We're further down the line there. You know, now I can't get into why that is the case. I think that's another story altogether, or another topic, you know, that's worthy of discussion. Not sure who to have that with, but I'm like, so does that mean that teachers are valued more economically in other countries? Does that not mean that because you're talking about the economy of said country? And I can't say that I'm as familiar with the economy of those countries, you know, to know what that answer is. Is it kind of a wash because of the rate of currency? I don't know. Those are a bunch of different technical things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other components to it. You're taking that into that. You don't know what other professions in those countries pay.
Right.
Like it doesn't mean anything other than the U.S. is kind of in the middle of the pack if you're comparing dollars to dollars when it comes to teachers' annual salaries.
Right.
You know,
right.
The problem is you don't really know. More importantly, as far as our community is concerned, it's fascinating to find out that special needs teachers don't get any extra money for the work that they do.
Yeah. So the research I did shows that there's some cases where they may, you know, get a little more, but you're still talking about, you know, certain designations and titles and everything that go in, you know, hand in hand with that. But then you still have people that are, you know, that every September or August are buying their own supplies as opposed to being given an allotment or something, you know, towards that or anything. That just doesn't happen. And I don't.
Well, I will say this, and I'm not defending. I sat on the board of a charter school for a while, and you know, went over budgets and this kind of thing. First of all, for every special ed student in class, the school gets additional money from the state to pay for additional services. I will say this, that when evaluating a budget, if you're looking at, do I want this limited amount of money to go to pay for supplies or go to teachers? We're going to give it to the teachers, right? In a way, that's kind of how that decision's made. There's something wrong. And I also have to keep in mind, there's federal regulations around education. There's state rules around education, how the state, takes some of its state budget and gives it to school. And then there's the district. So we live in Los Angeles, where the Los Angeles Unified School District is one of the largest organizations in the country. It's actually the second largest school district in the country. And of all the schools they have at every level, you know, they have to manage their district funds as well, right? And so there's a lot that goes into the money that trickles down to the teachers, and it's a behemoth of an organization, and and it's a challenge. But I will say this, I think if I have to defend, and I'm not defending, but I'd much rather whatever money's going to the teachers, and less in supplies, just because, right? Supplies are they're expendables, right? You go through
Right.
supply, and you put it on that. But also, I know that there are some schools that allow the teachers to say, "Hey, parents, here's my wish list of things that we'd like to have in the classroom to make your
That's what we've dealt with, yeah,
better." And so then it's shared between the parents and the students. Now remember, some schools in a district have more money than private schools have. The charter schools have a different set of standards too. So there's a lot of other differences that go into those kinds of conversations. I think overall teachers are underpaid. I think that the work that they do, and their hands are often tied, and it's a challenge. I think you find fewer people going into the profession than there used to be, sadly. But I think that's because of the sort of the political environment. I don't mean politics. I mean the political environment of dealing with administration and district restrictions and all this other stuff. That it's challenging. It definitely is challenging. And I think as we started to point out, there are teachers who made such a huge impact on our educational lives and our young lives that we know that the value is there for the students, but it needs massive overhaul in this country. Right now, there's a huge attack on higher education. But I think that we need to talk about what's happening at about K through 12.
Now, well, yeah, kind of a tangent other direction, but I'm always curious, is your understanding that the attack is on higher education itself, or what it consists of?
What do you mean?
Like, for instance, my thought is always how much applicable things are being taught in higher education, or maybe the thought that maybe that needs to be revamped, something that you're gonna get a degree in and then go out and be able to to use. It seems like there's a gap between what people are actually doing once they're finished, and maybe that falls more on the student.
You're talking about a technical / trade school versus a liberal arts education. There's huge differences between those, right? So what does somebody do with a social studies degree, right? And honestly, to me, that's an irrelevant conversation. I mean, people want to make it that, but I don't think that's because at the end of the day, what happens is you have a particular interest. An individual has a particular interest, and they want to pursue a path of study to get as much information about that area of interest that they have. And getting a degree is an accomplishment of a goal. It's an achievement of completing a course of study. There's a tremendous value in that. Tremendous value in that. I was a psych major undergrad, and I work in finance. There's not a correlation. It's what I was interested in, I love how human behavior works. And frankly, human behavior, as it turns out, is in everything that we do.
Everything.
So for somebody to have a subjective opinion about the value of a psych degree in undergrad is irrelevant, really, to what I end up doing with it. By the way, some people get a degree in something and they don't pursue something beyond that. That's irrelevant. If they want to pursue a higher education and they want to go into a master's degree or a PhD level, that's a basis by which they then get to the next level. So that's and by the way, I think you're right to some degree. There seems to be some attack on that. Like people are like, well, what are you going to do with that? Well,
yeah, you don't need college. Well, do you? I don't know. It depends on the individual.
I totally agree, and that's exactly it, right? Some people have succeeded without ever stepping foot on college campus. Some people have been in college for 20 years and they love the education process and part of the education process. That's completely different. I think that there's an attack on higher ed for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think that some of the challenge that we have in this country is that we've, you and I can have a much longer conversation. The government and the banking system are, if you look at it, some of the problems that we have economically in this country are related to those two institutions. The fact that a higher education, costs so much money in this country, and it's all subsidized by student loans, which then, keep people in debt for many, many, many years. That's a big challenge, and that's unnecessary. Student loans that compound on a daily basis, that interest, and that's unnecessary. That's where the revamp is. So what some people do is like, oh, you go get a college education, you're $100,000 in debt, and you're never going to pay that debt off with the job that you go get. And so now, rather than going into a profession like teaching, which doesn't pay as much, people think, oh, well, now I have to go get a job that will support me paying off these student loans. That's part of the problem. When the reality is, by the way, let me just say this. If you're a teacher and you have student loans, you qualify for forgiveness. You'll have your student loan completely forgiven if you're in the teaching profession. That is one of the things that the government has provided for to alleviate that issue. But the revamp of, so higher education is less, it is more at sort of the federal level and at the state, at the state education levels. But I will say this, as an example, the University of California, my alma mater, where is it over here?
Yes. University of California at Los Angeles, yes.
Only 30% of the UC system's budget, only 30% comes from the state. It's the state doesn't, same with any of the state schools, Cal State, UC, a very small amount of their budget actually comes from the state. Most of it comes from tuition, again, loans, grants, universities that are in research and development get a lot of grant support, a lot of grant money to fund a lot of the stuff that they do. Some get it from their athletics, that's a big part of their funding, piece of it. But as far as state funding is concerned, in UC system, it's 30%, actually, maybe even less than 30% these days. So the fact that people are ranking on higher education because they think that it's a waste of state or federal funds is really kind of a non-argument, because it's very limited amount that's coming from those budgets anyways. However, that's a different conversation. But to your point, listen, again, I think that what we've asked our special needs, actually, we don't even ask them. We don't even know that they're performing these services until we have, conferences, or if we're lucky enough to have a school that will, meet with us on a regular basis and tell us what's happening in their, in their classrooms. For those of us that have IEPs, remember, that's another thing that teachers have to participate in. And often, right, they have to adhere to a standard. They have to commit to something, a goal, and they have to operate within the constraints of a program, an individualized, education program that sometimes has them have to do stuff outside of what they normally provide in the class. So special needs teachers are a special, they are a special group of folks, really, truly special.
Yeah. And especially in our experience in Elijah's class, there's multiple aides in there. Some of them are a one-on-one assigned to a given child and things like that. But they're even potentially more underappreciated because they're not the actual teacher, so to speak. But you couldn't. But what your child gets from that class could not be without those people. I have had thought of, and will be reaching out to every last teacher that he has had since he set foot in a classroom, because they all play a role in where and who he is today. And I don't take for granted that we loved each and every one of them. We're blessed because at the end of the day, they're people. So there's challenges, and you don't know what somebody's going through and how it affects the way they communicate and everything. But it is such a selfless endeavor. But what they do, it's right up there with doctors.
I totally agree. And I will say this, right? There are some amazing teachers who dedicate themselves and are really phenomenal. I will say this: when we had the pandemic and we got a chance to watch Blake go through classes, that was an eye-opening experience. And in fact, in one particular situation, I was never on camera. I was in another area of my place. And I could hear the lesson going on. In one particular case, I felt the teacher was completely unreasonable, completely non-accommodating. And in fact, I reported him to administration, and they called him in. And it wasn't like I'm going to tell on him and let them go deal with it. No, I asked for a parent-teacher conference to have a conversation with administration available to hear. And when I said to him, I find your attitude acerbic, because it truly was. I said, you have no idea what the child is going through sitting on the other side of that camera. You yell at these kids to turn their camera on or whatever. You don't know if one of those children are homeless and are embarrassed to have their camera on. You're not taking into consideration what the child is going through during this pandemic when we're all stuck at home, and there's no softness. And I said, by the way, I listened to every one of his classes, and I'll give you somebody who's doing something on the opposite end who is extremely accommodating and I will tell you, the participation in his class is much more significant. In your class, nobody wants to say anything because of the way that you treat them. And he was like, quiet for a second. And he said, my wife has said the same thing about me. It's something I'm going to have to, I think I have to look at that. I didn't realize
you didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
By the way, of all the things that we can talk about the pandemic, I'm grateful for having had that experience, because at least I got a chance to get a glimpse into the classroom, right?
Yeah.
And my child's performance in the classroom, whether he speaks up or not, or we never know. Sometimes we'll get a report. Now we have digital, input, Schoology, and some of these other things where teachers can give us some feedback along the way, but we don't really get a chance to see what our children are doing or experiencing in the classroom. And to some degree, I think that's good. It gives the teachers some autonomy to teach the way they want. In some cases, when they're not, hitting the kids where they need to be, in the heart or, in the head, with that interest
where
level.
They need to connect. Yeah.
That's something that I wish we had more insight into.
Yeah.
So anyways, to your point, I think it's a beautiful thing to go back to those teachers that especially on the high school graduation, that milestone is, I'm so happy for you. And it's such a meaningful milestone. And for you to honor that with, a desire to reach out to all of the teachers who have had an influence says a lot about you, and a lot about what he has experienced, and that your appreciation for them is, it's honorable. And I find that to be, that's really, it's no different than how I feel about you about other things, but I think it's such a great idea. And I think that's such a beautiful gesture. And, you have posted things, and you have said on our podcast before, you've called out certain teachers by name because you wanted them to know how much you appreciated them. And I think that at the end of the day, I think that that's almost more valuable to teachers than the pay. Pay would be great, but to know they made a difference in somebody's life.
It matters, because it goes back to everything we're saying in terms of just being seen and being heard. And we get opportunities to learn about ourselves as well. My niece graduated from Cal State University Northridge. So we had there was a dinner on Sunday, and it was at a restaurant that you can reserve a private room and everything like that. So we did that, and my brother-in-law, right, his wife, a lot of her family was there, right? And these are people that we would see at family functions and events and things like that, but I haven't seen in a while. Well, it was really interesting. One family member kept looking at Elijah and saying, why does Shawn look so young? I can't get him. That doesn't make any sense. And like, wait a minute, that's Elijah. So they had no idea. I hadn't seen him in a while. But then he had the presence of mind he was working the room, going around to people's tables and things like that.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And I was a little more anxious about it than I realized. My, my brother-in-law, his wife, well, she says to me, just relax. I know how much you guys are used to caring for him. It's family. It's okay. And even though we don't have as many gatherings, so I haven't seen them in a long time, I don't know. His behavior is unpredictable, though sweet. And I don't know how everything's going to go. So when he gets up from the table and he's working the room, I'm like, do you know what I mean? So the other thing I realize is like how much of a balance is in place between how much you worry and how much you're actually between worry and protection, so to speak. Then it takes me back to the notion of managing a room full of children for whom you're responsible, dealing with the same thing, you can't, it's so immeasurable in value, Yeah.
I remember Jordan had a teacher who, by the way, was in a mainstream school, but led the special ed class. And so Jordan would be in that class a couple of periods. She was not great. She was clocking in her time to collect her pension. Like she was not connecting. It was just in how she treated the kids. There are other teachers who don't pay attention in class to what's happening in class. Right. And by the way, I some of this comes from, I was a coach, right? I was a baseball coach for Blake growing up at the time that he was 6 until, just a few years ago. And in the care that we take as coaches to try to encourage and support. And I remember at the end of every year, like I kind of hand out little, acknowledgments of all the kids played and how emotional it would be for me. In some cases, like I had to stop because I'm getting choked up and just like the advancements that some of our kids, went from like the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, if you're aware and you're conscious of that along the way, the value that you get out of having made a difference in somebody's life, it's immeasurable, and I hope that our teachers look at, going back from the beginning of the year, they go 100 days out, right? They go mid-semester break, end of the year, and be able to look back and go, did we advance? Like, did we make a difference from the beginning to the end? Did we see progress? Did our kids produce? There's so many great films that have been made of, teachers and schools, and some that are good. There's a Canadian comedian named Jerry D. He has a show called Mr. D. It's on streaming now, some cable, and he's not the most, I don't want to call him inept, but he's not the best teacher, but he kind of calls himself out on that stuff. And it's hilarious of what teachers deal with in the classroom. So, they're people, they're on the same spectrum, but I will say this, there's folks that deal with special needs students. There's a special place in heaven for those folks.
Exactly.
Because of the contribution that they make to their lives and subsequently to our lives as well because of it. So, Shawn, I think you wanting to talk about this, and yes, I think in general there's a lack of appreciation for teachers. I think for special needs families, probably less so than the general population, because we do acknowledge and appreciate the work that these folks do with our kids.
Yeah, I would hope so. And for us, like the way Elijah feels about school and feels about them is a reflection of what they do. I mean, he loves school and loves his teachers and everything. So that's why then the next phase is going to be really, interesting to see, just full of a whole lot of gratitude, ton of it.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, I think, one of these days, I think, well, we've had Mark Esposito on, who's a tutor who deals with special needs, who does not have a family member with special needs, no children at least, and commits to being a counselor and a guide for, folks with special needs. I think we should look at having a special needs teacher or two on and have the conversation with them about, what goes on with their day. Yeah.
That's the interesting point. The ones that I've spoken to haven't said no, because I've had conversations with them about being on here, but they're so hero without a cape in terms of mentality. They're like, well, I don't know if I could do that. What do you mean you don't know if you could? You considering what you do every day?
Because I don't think they think of themselves as heroes.
They don't. That's why when we actually have a guest and I ask them about their origin, from where their powers come from, their superpowers and everything, I start by saying, you probably don't see yourself as a hero, but that's almost what the first requirement to being a hero is, that you don't even see yourself as one, because you're too busy being one to acknowledge it.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's a great topic and one that we should continue to, as we get to the end of the school year and the year wraps up, dads and grads. June is the month of dads and grads, and our students who matriculate and graduate do so because of the care of these important folks. And so, hats off to all the teachers in our lives.
Most definitely,
either by profession or just by their influence,
formal or otherwise. That's right. We appreciate each and everything that you do. Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, but as we're getting to the end of this episode, good conversation. Again, I know when we don't have a guest, we don't usually do the question. Do you want me to ask you the question?
Yeah, you know what? Because I think it's one that a person should ask themselves constantly anyway, and I try to do that. So I don't mind. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I'll ask you if this is the point in the episode where we ask people, our ability to change the world. It's a reflection of our ability to change ourselves. So give us one example of something a belief that you once had that you no longer hold on to.
Okay. Especially in light of today's conversation.
Yeah.
I used to think that, I don't know if I'd say that I misunderstood my intelligence. I used to think that where I thought I lacked intelligence, I realized that it's a matter of the type of intelligence I possess. In other words, most people, I guess you can measure IQs and all that kind of stuff, but when it comes to academics, are one of the greatest misnomers about intelligence. One of the most faulty barometers about intelligence. And once upon a time, I did not believe that to be true, especially coming from the Caribbean, where, like I said, it's education is, you're getting good grades. Like, you would see people and they would tell you, oh my gosh, you're getting so big. How old are you now? Dad, you have a birthday coming up. What do you want? Yeah, you're getting good grades. You're being good. Because the question was always, are you getting good grades? And I don't know whoever goes, no, well, no, not really. Everybody always says yes, because it was just this horrible thing. And they're important and they matter, but they don't matter in the way that I think we once thought. And the way that we once thought was that if you're getting bad grades, some would be extreme to say that you're a bad kid or a bad person, or you're just not bright. But everything is about how you interpret. What is your type of intelligence is essentially your type or mode of communication, and if I hadn't had that discovery, a lot of the conversations that you and I had, which we talked about, when we come up with show topics, especially when we don't have a guest or even the guest, I'll say, what about such and such? This will make a great topic. I don't even say that'll make a great topic. What about if we talk about so-and-so? You'll say, oh, that's great. And if you don't see it, you'll push back. I mention a guest, you'll say, the same thing. Oh, that's great. Why would we want them on? Once upon a time, without me realizing about the type of intelligence I possess, my lack of belief in maybe even having any would not allow me to accept you asking a question like that. But that was a dumb idea, I guess, and who knows, maybe somebody's still there, so continue to ask yourself the question, because if nothing ever changes. And if you're not growing, you're dying. You're just taking up space. So The question is, immeasurable in value, continue to always ask it.
Yeah, I agree. All right.
Right.
On that note,
Yeah.
All right, everybody. So as we wrap up the show, I say every end of every episode, empathy and love. That's what it's all about. You don't know somebody's situation, so have some empathy. Be empathetic. You do not know what they're going through. You do not know what they're dealing with. And ask questions before you make a judgment call. And finally, if you look at the world through lenses of love, the world's just a much better place, especially with what's going on in the world today.
Most definitely.
Back to you, Shawn.
Yeah. Questions are more powerful than statements. Let's try to be a little bit more childlike than childish. We come into this world, for most of us, unfortunately, but fortunately, as close as we're ever going to get to perfection, just because we believe that anything and anyone is possible. We have no judgment about anyone, no limitations. We come in here as pure love. And we need to hold on to as much of that as we possibly can, because the child within us is the answer to everything tomorrow. Again, you'll see the link for Billy Footwear. You get 10% off any given price that they may have. And if you go to our website, just2dadspodcast.com, there you will also find a registration link for The Den, which is a men's group that we've created for dads and caregivers of those with special needs. It's been one of the most rewarding things I've ever done or having been a part of. So to everyone within the sound of our voice, WSDX AM radio in the U.S. Virgin Islands and beyond, thank you so very much, and we love you.
We love you. See you next week.